Hello and welcome back to Doing Death with your host Jan. In today's episode we're going to look at what happens immediately after a death occurs. We'll look at death at home and death occurring in the hospital and the people who should be on hand to provide support to you during this time. We'll also take a look at what's required to register a death. This episode is entitled When a Death Occurs and is dedicated to siblings Leslie, Teresa and Ron. Rest in peace. The death processes we're talking about here today relate to England and Wales only. The very first step after someone has passed away is for your doctor to confirm that death has actually occurred. Checks to establish that the person's circulation, respiration, brain and neurological functions have completely stopped. For obvious reasons, these checks or confirmations should be undertaken by a qualified medical doctor. But in some cases, for example, where the death has taken place in a nursing home, a registered nurse may also confirm or verify a death. So, what happens when death occurs at home and it is expected? If you're present at a death which takes place at home, no matter the time of day or night, you should call your GP as soon as you can. Depending on the nature and time of the death, your GP will either attend to the home themselves or refer you to an out-of-hours locum GP service which covers your area. The GP or locum will attend your home to confirm that death has occurred. Once the doctor has been, you'll be able to arrange for your chosen funeral director to remove your loved one into their care, and they operate a 24/7, 365 service. They will transfer your loved one to their central mortuary. What happens when a death isn't expected and occurs at home? When someone dies at home unexpectedly because of an accident or other unforeseen incident, it's likely that the police will be called and the death will be subject to a coroner's investigation. When the death happens at home, but the person has not been discovered for a long period of time, perhaps because the person lived alone, was infirm and had no family, the police should be called as soon as the body is discovered. The police will usually work with a local funeral director to arrange for the body to be removed to the general public mortuary, pending a coroner's post-mortem or inquest. A post-mortem is carried out to ensure that there's been no foul play and that the death isn't suspicious in any way. It's important to note here that it's not possible to register a death until the coroner has confirmed the cause of death, and funeral arrangements will need to be postponed until the coroner concludes their findings. What happens when a death occurs at the hospital? If the death occurs at a hospital, the medical staff in the establishment will confirm and determine the cause of death and notify the next of kin that the death has occurred. If you're not present when your loved one passes away, the medical staff will call you as soon as possible after the death and ask whether you wish to see your loved one before they are removed to the hospital mortuary. So here's a recap of the steps so far. Number 1, a GP or locum or registered nurse will confirm that the death has occurred. Number 2, Once a death has been established, if it happened at home and was expected, your loved one may now be removed directly to the care of the funeral directors. Number 3. If the death happened at home and there are questions about how the death occurred, a coroner will need to be involved. This means that the body cannot go to the funeral directors straight away, but instead will be removed to the local general public mortuary until a post-mortem is done. Number 4. If the death happened in hospital, the body will usually be held until the death has been registered and the funeral director is in receipt of the relevant documentation in order to remove your loved one to their care. Okay, a death has occurred at home or in the hospital, and by law you now need to let everyone know that the death has happened. We do this via a process called registering the death. So, who can register a death? A person can register a death if they are a relative of the deceased, a person present at the death, the person who is arranging the funeral with the funeral director, the occupier of the home or hospital where the death occurred, and under extenuating circumstances, the funeral director can also register a death. This would normally be done though where there was absolutely no one else able to register. The person registering will need to provide the deceased's passport or birth certificate. Other documents such as a marriage certificate or a medical card are only useful to ensure that the registration is completed accurately, especially if there are tricky names or multiple names. The person registering the death will also need to know the following: the date and place of the death, the deceased's full name and surname, the deceased's date of birth and the place where they were born, the deceased's occupation and the name and occupation of their spouse or civil partner. And the registrar will also need to know the deceased's usual address, whether the deceased was getting a pension or allowance from public funds, and the date of birth of the surviving widow or widower or civil partner. It used to be that you had to visit the registrar in person, but since COVID-19, it's now possible to request an appointment to register online. Registering is currently taking place over the telephone as opposed to a face-to-face interview, so there's no need to attend to register the death in person anymore. And the person you register a death with is called a registrar. A death must be registered within 5 days in the borough in which the death occurred. But I say that with the caveat that many councils experience a backlog and the 5-day rule may not always apply. When you've completed the registration, a signed copy of what we call the green certificate will be emailed directly to the funeral director so that the funeral can go ahead. If a coroner has been involved, instead of the green certificate, a Form 6 will be issued by email to the funeral director. And the green certificate and the coroner's Form 6 are the funeral director's authorisation to proceed to burial or cremation. The registrar will provide a link to a service called Tell Us Once, This free service informs multiple government departments of the death, agencies such as HM Revenue and Customs and the Department for Work and Pensions, DWP, who will cancel benefits and entitlements like universal credit, child tax credits or state pension. The Passport Office and the DVLA will also be informed, as will the local council, so as to cancel housing benefit, council tax and remove the person from the electoral roll. Tell Us Once will also contact some public sector pension schemes so that they can cancel any future pension payments. A death certificate, which is not the same as the green certificate, can now be ordered online as well. At the moment in England and Wales, these cost £11 per copy. So to recap, once the death has occurred, you will telephone the registrar of deaths in the borough in which the death occurred to make an appointment to register. Number 2, the registrar will issue you a link to the Tell Us Once service so that you can notify various government agencies that the death has occurred. Number 3, a green certificate or coroner's form 6 will be issued to the funeral director, allowing the funeral to go ahead. Number 4, you can order a death certificate at a cost of £11 each. Right, earlier I talked about a death occurring at home. If a death which was expected occurs at home, your chosen funeral director will be responsible for removing your loved one into their care. You'll need to have thought about which funeral directors you would like to use. Perhaps it's one that a family or friends have recommended, or if you've had a bereavement in the family, one you've used in the past. But any reputable funeral director will ensure that you know when they are going to arrive to collect your loved one, and they'll normally give you an estimated time of arrival. When the funeral director removal team arrives to your home, they'll introduce themselves and ask for your name and also confirm the full name of the person who has died. The ambulance team may have to wear protective clothing or use special equipment to lift and move your loved one. Don't be alarmed by this. This will mainly depend on how and where the person has passed and where their body is physically located in the premises. The funeral director staff should always be courteous and ensure that your dignity and that of your loved one is maintained at all times. They'll also make a note of what your loved one is wearing and any jewellery they have on. They should ask whether there are any items that you wish to remain with your loved one, or whether you wish for any property to be removed and handed over to you. Before the funeral director leaves, they'll confirm the address to where your loved one is being taken, and you may be asked to sign for any property which they have returned to you. Now, in terms of personal possessions when a death occurs in hospital, it's normally good practice for the next of kin to remove any personal possessions that they wish to keep, and make, family members and hospital staff aware that you're doing this. I've had a few instances where families have raised claims with the hospital for missing property, such as a wedding ring, only for them to turn up in the possession of another relative, a sibling perhaps. Having said that, personal property is difficult to keep a track of in somewhere as large as a hospital, and things do sadly go missing. So, your loved one arrives into the care of the funeral director's mortuary. Your funeral director will call you to advise that your loved one has been safely received into their care and to inquire whether you're now willing and able to attend the funeral home to discuss your requirements for the funeral arrangements. In our upcoming episodes, we'll go into more detail about the things that you'll need to consider in order to arrange a funeral, as well as the support you'll receive from your funeral director. I hope you found this episode useful. Do send any questions you may have to doingdeathwithjan@outlook.com. And as usual, there are links to bereavement support organisations below. You can leave feedback as well via our YouTube channel, Doing Death, and the link is also below. Life and death are sides of the same coin. To contemplate death is to ensure we make the most of living. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care and live well.